Welcome to episode 9 of the Extremely Non-Extreme podcast. I am Quentin Wittrock, the host of the program and the founder of Principle-Based Politics, which is a nonprofit organization based in Minnesota. My guests today are Stan Hamilton and Brian McDaniel. Stan is a retired businessman who serves as the current Republican Party chair for Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. The 3rd District includes the western suburbs of Minneapolis, along with much of the North and South Metro as well. Stan is the Republican chair of that entire area and its 700 and some thousand residents. Brian McDaniel is a political strategist and a partner in a government relations firm based in Minnesota. He is a long-standing fixture in at the Minnesota State Capitol and in politics generally in Minnesota, primarily from a Republican perspective. The topic I would like to cover with these gentlemen is the future of the Republican Party in Minnesota. Republicans have not won a statewide general election since 2006. Although they hold 4 of the 8 seats in Minnesota's delegation to the U.S. House of Representatives, none of those are in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and all are in more rural areas. So I'd like to start out today, Stan, with you, and say, first of all, welcome to the program. Second of all, Ruth Bittner, my neighbor here on the river, ran for the Minnesota House of Representatives in the special election to fill the seat formerly held by Melissa Hortman. With the R beside her name on the ballot for Republican, Ruth lost by 21 points. What message do you take from that?
Well, we went into that with a lot of enthusiasm and hope, and I'm coming out realizing that I think most people vote for the D or the R, and there are more Ds than there are Rs in 34B. Doesn't matter if you appeal. Well, and frankly, we did not have the time to really appeal to the electorate relative to messaging. It was a short notice. Ruth jumped in. And we were trying to get our Republican voters out because we knew the turnout would be relatively low. I'm going to vent a little bit. I think the electorate could have voted for what I believe was a very good person in Ruth, who was kind, reasonable, a listener, not a politician. Instead, they voted for XP Lee. And I don't know the man personally, but I do know that he posted 8647 on his Facebook page. And I talked to him about that at the League of Women Voters, and he didn't apologize for that. And I think that is unfortunate, but it's out of the playbook of what I would believe is the Democratic Party. The end justifies the means when it's evil. And I think the DFL should have condemned him for this, but instead they endorsed him. So sour grapes on my part. We learned a lesson. Ruth did get 39% of the vote. That's up from what the Republican had gotten in 2022 and in 2024, a small amount, but nonetheless disappointing. And I'm not really into moral victories. However, does not curb my enthusiasm for what I believe will be a bright future for the Republican Party in 2026. And I think Ruth would agree with me and is most likely prepared to run again.
We'll talk more about that. Brian, I don't know how carefully you followed the Ruth Bittner election, or some people call it the Melissa Hortman replacement election. What are your thoughts, if you have any?
Well, I had very reasonable expectations, I think, and actually Ruth Bittner, who I don't know personally, but have heard nothing but good things, just as Stanley said. But she was facing headwinds, not just from the makeup of the district, which has gone blue for a number of cycles, but also she, more than even XP Lee, who has been elected in the area himself. So some people are used to voting for him, but, they were up against the headwinds of, what is Melissa Hortman's legacy? She didn't leave the legislature because of, fraud or, or any kind of, misgivings or misappropriation or miss anything on her part. She was murdered. She was assassinated. And so to make a switch to fill out the rest of her time, to make that switch would have been a tall order, even in a more 50-50 district. So by virtue that she got almost 40%, I thought that was actually really good. In our office, we had a pool set up, and I actually thought that it was going to be, that Representative-elect Lee was going to get a higher number than he got. So I think I share Stan's optimism a little bit, because that could have been easily an 80-20 situation if it was purely a referendum on the memory of Melissa Hortman, which it turned out that it evidently was not.
So, Brian, the election of XP Lee leaves the Minnesota House of Representatives in a tie, back to a tie, which is where we left off when the session ended in the spring. How optimistic do you believe Republicans are, Brian, as far as what will happen in 2026 if the Bittner election is not, or I should call it the Lee election, is not a indicator of things to come for the Democratic Party generally? What is going to happen?
Well, and I'll just give a very quick list of my bio. So, I do own a government relations firm now, so I'm a lobbyist, but I've had all the jobs in politics. I've worked at the House of Representatives. I worked for Governor Tim Pawlenty. I've worked for a couple different law firms where I've been a lawyer and a lobbyist, and I've worked on countless campaigns. So, and having been former staff and worked for the former Speaker of the House, Steve Swigum, what happens at the House of Representatives is something that I pay a lot of attention to, and it matters not only for my business, but also, as a friend of the elephant, I'm invested in the Republicans' success there. So with a 67-67 tie, that really, tamps down what can get done in the next session. But for the most part, Republicans coming out of the DFL trifecta are just trying to slow things down and stop bad ideas. They know that with a DFL Senate and a DFL governor, they're not going to be able to be proactive on too much. So I think, absent something unruly coming from Washington D.C., which is a pretty big if. But with absent that, I think Republicans feel very good about the mismanagement of the state by the Democrats. And when you look at the margins, 67-67 in the House, and once the special elections in the Senate are done, 34-33 Democrat in the Senate, you only need to win one or two here and there. You don't need to have a big red wave to get the majority. And with Governor Walz choosing to run for a third term, if the Republicans can find a credible candidate, which they will start coming out now, we have a real shot to beat Tim Walz as well. So it could be a great Republican year, but Donald Trump always makes things a little uneasy until we kind of know how he has decided to proceed.
We'll come back to that. That you've anticipated my next question. But Stan, how optimistic would you say you are, both as to the Republican House seats, and I believe there are 17 of them within your third district, and then the Senate elections will be in 2026 as well, and I believe there are 10 of those in our third district.
You are correct. And I'm not going to say that any of these will be easy. We currently have 5 of those 27 positions. And one of those positions, the incumbent, Kristen Robbins, is now running for governor. So that might mean we'll have a new candidate in her representative seat. So the task is tall. I'm not going to make a prediction, but what we have to do is we have to go from 5 seats to at least 6, 7, or 8. We're not going to sweep 27 seats, but if we can pick up 1, 2, or 3, hold whatever else we have, it's very possible that we can control the House and the Senate. And that is our goal. And that's what CD3 is working on. And the places where we hope to be able to deliver those are in the suburbs, because the outstate is predominantly 100% red. And the inner city is so deep blue that it would be very difficult to, secure a House or Senate seat in Minneapolis or in St. Paul. So we have some districts that we were very close in 2024. And we're going to find good candidates, and we're going to put resources behind it and try and turn the tide. I'm optimistic we can do it, primarily because the DFL has given us a playbook to run on. They have created such a challenging environment in our state that I am hoping that common sense will prevail to some of those swing voters, and it will turn the tide and improve our state. So I remain optimistic, but I recognize the task is tall.
Brian brought up the Donald Trump factor, Stan, and is Trump a factor in the future Minnesota races? Although his popularity amongst Republicans is very high, the president suffers from overall record low numbers on a national basis. In areas where President Trump is unpopular, can Republicans overcome his negative coattails in a midterm election?
Well, that's it. It is a midterm, but you know that the DFL will probably run on 2 issues, abortion and Trump. They aren't going to run on improving the state. They don't know how to do that. So that's what they'll focus on. And the question is whether or not in these suburban races we can thread the needle. Hopefully, Trump will not be a big negative. The DFL will try to make him that, but I hope that he will not be at that time. 15 months or whatever it is till election is a long time. It's light years in election politics. So where his standing will be, I don't know. But yeah, we have to elect and nominate candidates that are a little bit more moderate if we're going to be in the suburbs and if we're going to win elections. And where we are, at least in the state races, we're not talking about federal issues. We're talking about what's amiss here in the state of Minnesota, and there's much for those candidates to talk about. So I don't think we're going to have strong MAGA candidates in the suburbs, but I don't think Donald Trump necessarily needs to be a negative for us. I personally believe he's doing a lot of good for our country.
Brian, can the Republicans overcome the Trump coattails?
I think 100%, because every candidate has to distinguish themselves. I mean, and they have to find ways to run in their district without being overly reliant on the president or overly critical on the president, to the president. I mean, I'm an old CD3 guy myself. I went to high school in Plymouth, and my first internship was with Jim Ramstad, and I basically owe my political career to Eric Paulson. So I have seen the Republican Party and the suburbs in the Twin Cities shift from back when they were bright red to now. I moved, so I've lived in Eagan, which used to be red and is now deep blue, and then I moved to Apple Valley, which was red, deep red, and now it's blue. And I'm in Lakeville now, and Lakeville's pretty red, but I'm going to have to go to Elko New Market next, and then pretty soon I'm in Austin, and then I'm in Kansas City. But I have seen the suburbs slip away from us, and I know that Stan and probably you, Quentin, would agree with me on this. Our candidates, they don't need to be moderates in that they need to drastically change their politics. They need to have a more empathetic, more moderate tone in order to kind of regain the suburbs. And I think that if we have candidates that just don't pound on certain social issues in a way, not that they're wrong, because I'm sure I agree with them almost 100% on a lot of those things, but you need to show empathy, or else you start losing moderates in the suburbs. And with the Democrats solely focusing so much on issues that really aren't broad based, that we can make up a lot by focusing on the economy and people's paychecks and their pocketbooks and their kitchen tables. But that has to be something that we make a conscious effort to do.
Well, you talked about tone, and I think an interesting experiment occurred in the 2024 election in the 3rd congressional district. The Republicans, as you indicated, Brian, won the U.S. House races in the western suburbs of Minneapolis for 5 decades in a row until the midterm election in Trump's first term. And the Republican Party hasn't won the district back since. Last year, in an open race, so I think a good test, the experienced and formidable GOP candidate, Tad Jude, running with what I would call a fairly soft tone, and not running as a Trump candidate. He lost to Kelly Morrison, another newcomer, by 17 points, 70,000 votes. Republicans also added no new state legislators within the 3rd district. But Trump, who is Trump, lost the 3rd district by 21 points, and the Republican U.S. Senate candidate, Royce White, who had, in my judgment, the least empathetic tone and maybe the harshest tone, lost Amy Klobuchar by 30 points in the 3rd congressional district. So maybe you're right. It is a tone thing. But is the formerly red district permanently blue? Brian, I'll start with you.
Well, I don't know that these days I would never say that anything is permanently anything. I mean, in our lifetime, I don't know that Minneapolis and St. Paul are gonna switch very much. But when I started my political career at the House of Representatives it was the year 2000, because I remember when I got hired, we didn't know who the president was, because that was Bush Gore. They were still hammering that out. But when I started there at the House of Representatives, I talked about how the suburbs were pretty red, but also the Iron Range was the deepest blue that you can think of. Rochester was red. The certain areas in northwestern Minnesota were blue, and so there are shifts that happen. One of the things I like to say is the 60s became the 80s somehow, and I don't know what the catalyst is going to be to kind of change what we are now to something different in 10 years or in 20 years, but it's going to happen, because that's just how, life and politics are. And maybe it takes somebody like a Donald Trump to really kind of change the electorate, and what he did with like blue collar workers in the northern part of the state. But nothing is permanent. But in the western suburbs, I think it is maybe a little bit more permanent than it is in some other areas. But as we also said, it only takes 1 or 2 seats to really flip things. And you have legislators like Andrew Myers in the 3rd district, who really is a Republican who is working really hard to reflect the district. So it can happen.
Stan, what's your assessment of what kind of a tone Republicans could use to be most successful in a district like yours, the 3rd district, suburban, probably the wealthiest district in Minnesota?
Well, I think the tone has to probably be something different than what I would lead with, because I'm kind of aggressive, opinionated, And as Brian said, the word empathetic, I think, is very important. Another person told me, if you want to appeal to a young voter, if you want to appeal to someone who's a skeptic, you can't yell at them. You whisper to them. You want them to have to lean in and hear your story. And so I do think that our candidates probably are not going to be fire breathers. They're going to have to be more empathetic if they're going to reach the voters that will make a difference. And I think if we look at young people and we look at educated women in the suburbs, that maybe are a couple of areas that we need, or minorities that we need to attract. I was recently provided this survey. I think it was done by, maybe it wasn't the Freedom Club, but anyway, called the Torchlight Series. And if you look at what Minnesotans said were the important issues, they are the issues that Republicans should be able to make some hay with. I mean, there are things like taxes and the household budget. Illegal immigration came up in there, and that's not necessarily a state issue, other than, can you say, sanctuary state, which is very much related to the immigration issue. But then crime is there and education is there. And those were from 39% down to 6%, but abortion came in at 0.8%. So if we can appeal to these swing voters in an empathetic, compassionate, and intelligent way, we can't just say taxes are too high, but we have to provide meaningful suggestions for a path forward that would reduce taxes, improve education, reduce crime, those types of things. So I'm not giving up. I believe we can do it, and we will do it. And in 2026, the House and the Senate here in Minnesota will be red.
That's you've articulated some issues that could be used by Republicans in the third district, Stan. And I'm glad to hear that. Most of what I've heard from Minnesota Republicans generally, and in the media and in social media and other places, how bad the Democrats are, particularly Governor Walz. And he hadn't even announced he was running in 2026. And at the state fair, of course, one Republican group had a booth that didn't say anything about Republicanism. It was labeled Walz Lies. And Stan, is it just his honesty, or what is so awful about our governor that I've heard Brian mention this too, but it gives Republicans hope that Walz can be beaten at the gubernatorial level, and that will hurt Democrats in general?
Well, Quentin, this is a very challenging question, because at the beginning of this podcast, and the listeners didn't hear this, but Quentin wants to keep this to less than an hour. But if you want to tell what's wrong with Governor Walz, I need at least a couple of hours. I'll try to be quick. But I would start with the fact that he spent his entire life in government. As far as I can tell, he was a teacher, then a military guy, a congressman, now he's a governor. I don't think he's ever gotten up in the morning and said, what do I have to do next week to put enough money in the coffers to meet the payroll for these 20 people that work for me? He's never had to face that challenge. He is running what is now a $33 billion a year enterprise. No business experience. I believe way in over his head. He is no longer a public servant, but I think he's a career government employee. Now, if you want to know specifically, K-12, he's a teacher, and yet our K-12 system is, I would say, in crisis. Less than half the kids can read to proficient levels. I've said this many times, but the The Democrats have courted and perfected an image that they are for the poor, the downtrodden, the misfortunate, the minorities. You can go to the 2023 or the Minnesota Department of Education website in 2023. The proficiency rate in North Minneapolis is predominantly, if not 100%, African American and probably poorer economic status people. Okay, that's the constituency that the Democrats say they play to. Those kids' proficiency rate in reading was 8%, in science was 3%, in math was 0%. I don't know how any Democrat, Walz, or any DFL legislator, Education Minnesota, or the Minnesota Department of Education, I don't know how any of them can look themselves in the mirror and say, we've done a good job. They are condemning those children to a life of hopelessness, most likely poverty, and perhaps crime. And that is unforgivable. And as a Republican, I think that should be one of our top priorities, is to fix K-12 public education, not to teach victimhood, but to teach kids how to face a challenge and overcome them, give them the skills to do that. Well, in any event, they've passed mandates, which are, some are funded, some are partially funded, but don't have anything to do with education. The Center for the American Experiment tracked administrative costs. Over the past 22 years, student population went up 2%, teacher population went up 5%, administrative population went up 132%. And I don't blame the superintendents for that. But when the DFL and the legislature, when they pass a mandate, every mandate requires someone to set it up, someone to monitor it, someone to report on it. Before you know it, we're just measuring mandates and we're not teaching kids. And the mandates are for unemployment insurance for bus drivers. It's for the READ Act. Believe it or not, I support the READ Act, but it's very unfortunate that in this state, the reading scores have gone so terrible that they finally woke up and they said we have to go back to phonics. But now we have to teach reading teachers how to teach reading. Did you get that? We're teaching reading teachers how to teach reading, and we're spending millions of dollars doing it. It's very unfortunate. You can't discipline a student. We rate below Mississippi. And I'll share one more in education before I go to public safety, taxes, you name it. But I have to talk about a story that involves you, Quentin. In 2020, I got to get my years here right. 2024, only a year and a half ago, you were running for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District, and you were seeking the Republican Party endorsement. And we had our convention at the Wayzata Central Middle School. Do you remember that?
Sure.
I was there early in the morning because I had a position in the party and I was helping it set up and all that stuff. It was busy and I had to use the restroom. Every time I went out to the lobby of the auditorium to the lobby, there was a line outside the bathroom door, the men's room, to go in. I said, I haven't got time to stand in that line. Finally, at 4:00, the convention is over and I'm saying, I'm going to go to the bathroom, and there's no line. I went into the men's room. I'd been in that men's room many times because I lived just 2 miles from that school. I'd been to events. I went in and I figured out why there was a line outside the door. And it was because there were no longer any urinals in the men's room. They had replaced everything with stalls from floor to ceiling. Now, I don't think that's a good use of taxpayer money. I think that is nonsense, but that's what's happened under the leadership of the Democratic Party. Public safety.
I'm gonna break in here, and we'll come back to some of the other issues, public safety and all of the others. The education one, I agree with you, is a big issue that Republicans could run on, which seems interesting because education has always been the purview of the Democrats, the DFL party and the teacher unions. And Brian, as a strategist, how do you think Republicans can most effectively relate to Governor Walz, both electorally in trying to defeat him and in lawmaking for the time when he is the governor?
Well, and let me just say that everything Stan just said, I agree with wholeheartedly. My wife is a second grade teacher, and she and I do battle weekly on the stories that I hear coming back from what happens at her school and things like that. Now, Governor Walz, what's interesting, and I have a family connection to him. I actually have a lot of personal affection for him. However, the man who ran for Congress and won for Congress does not bear much resemblance to the person who is our governor. And I think what he has suffered from is from coming off as unauthentic now, because the old NRA Tim is not the progressive Tim that we have seen as governor, and then whatever he was when he was running for vice president. And so with the education system in Minnesota being as horrible as it is, with crime, with squandering an $18 billion surplus, and all of the near $1 billion worth of fraud that we know about, why would it even be a question that he is easily beatable? He is easily beatable. The reason why it's a question is because we haven't had the quality of candidate on the statewide level that we need. And that doesn't mean that all of them were bad people, but they have to be able to raise money and identify with the right wing and the moderates, and then scoop up some people that are lost sheep. They have to be able to do that, and you can't do that if you are just a one-note candidate talking about one of those issues. They have to be able to raise money, and they have to be able to be articulate on all of those issues. Tim Walz is extremely vulnerable right now, and the only person that doesn't know that is Tim Walz. And he does not have friends. I mean, I'm at the Capitol all the time. The Democrats are extraordinarily upset with him for many different reasons. They did not really want him to run again. And 2 weeks ago, I would say it was 80-20. He wasn't going to run. And then that shifted. But then when you talk about the proposed special session on gun violence, you would think Republicans are 100% against it. Democrats are 100% for it. No way. The Democrats do not want to come back to talk about, and I'm getting this from Democrats, and it's progressive Democrats, it's suburban moderates, it's all of them. They think he is going off half-cocked on this because to use a bad pun, unintentionally, but he he just to placate the families who we have empathy for from the Annunciation shooting, he just says we're going to try to do something, and we're going to catch the Republicans for not doing something. But he didn't talk to DFL leaders. He didn't talk to GOP leaders. And what that means is that he's out on an island by himself, and this is going to be a disaster for him. And it'll be real interesting to see what happens in the next couple of weeks, because he does not only not have the votes to pass something, he doesn't have enough votes for people that are even going to want to try.
I wrote a blog post a couple of weeks ago about Governor Walz's decision, which at that point he hadn't made, whether to run for governor. And I urged him not to run because he was, not that I want to do his party any favors, but I said he was repeating the same exact mistake that Joe Biden made. He was a very weak, vulnerable candidate that the opposition party would be salivating to run against, and does his own party and his state a disservice to run, just like Joe Biden did, and with the presidential race. And of course, he didn't listen to me. I don't know if he read my blog post, but some of the other, Stan has pointed out and stressed the education and the unbusinesslike running of the state of Minnesota with a $18 billion budget surplus that was depleted immediately, and half again as much added in new spending. Then there are, I also pointed out things like the COVID shutdowns, which I think as time goes on, people continue to hold against him, and George Floyd, prosecution of police officers, economic issues, kitchen table issues like inflation, high taxes, unaffordability of college, childcare, housing, excessive state regulation, and the emphasis on identity groups. All of these things, and then even the news, the appointment of donors to the State Board of Regents, and the state paying $430,000 to prepare Governor Walz to testify at a U.S. House committee hearing. All of those things, maybe those are the other things you were going to mention. Stan, is there anything that we haven't talked about, Stan, that you think also leaves Governor Walz extremely vulnerable?
Well, I mean, you've hit on them. I have so many examples, but I won't bore the listeners with them. But it's besides K-12, it is public safety. 12 people shot in 12 hours in downtown Minneapolis. The city burns and he sits aside. Community violence interrupters. I think a Cedric Frazier piece of legislation from 2023, who's running now to be our Hennepin County attorney. And, where they put grants out to NGOs who then hire community violence interrupters. And now we've seen some of them carrying weapons and discharging them in the cities. Public safety, he's a failure. Taxes in the economy, we have high income exodus and low income influx. That's what's happening in our state. Our state GDP is lower than the national average for the first time in, I don't know, probably history. It's one thing after another relative to the economy, the $1 billion in theft, those things. Another example of the arrogance of the Democratic Party that I think people need to know about. I am continually frustrated with public officials who thwart the law, who don't pay attention to it. At the end of the 2024 session, the DFL passed this omnibus bill that had 1,400 pages and probably covered 100 subjects. And they knew, the DFL knew, and the governor knew, that in the Minnesota Constitution, there is a single subject provision in the Constitution. You're not supposed to advance a bill that has more than one subject. They advanced a bill that had hundreds of subjects, and they passed it at 11:59 p.m. that night. And then the governor, he signed it, knowing it was unconstitutional. And they don't care. They do not care that they're violating the law because they know to litigate that will take 2 years. They know that taxpayer-funded attorneys from the AG's office will defend them. They know that once a judgment might get reached, it will be impossible to reverse the consequence, and they just smile all the way to the bank with how they thwarted the law. And I think there needs to be consequences for that. Now, there was a hearing in a court. The district court here in the state of Minnesota ruled that a provision of that law was to be thrown out because there were 100 subjects in it, and the plaintiff had one subject, which was the binary trigger. So it was the gun owners caucus. They threw it out. But the judge made reference to the reality is this all should be thrown out. But I'm not sure how we would administer that. And that is the evil that pervades the Democratic Party. The end justifies the means. We didn't have a governor who could stand up and say, time out. I'm going to call a special session. We're going to break this bill down and we're going to make people vote on the individual subjects. No, we got the power. We're going to do it. So I would just appeal to the listeners to think about that. There is some ethics here that we should pay attention to, and it matters. And I don't think we're getting that from the DFL. I'm sorry, that's my point.
I hear the criticisms, and I also know that at the GOP booth, and I know you worked there, Stan, at the state fair, the main Minnesota GOP booth, there was a lot of Trump 2028 material and other things about Trump. Not a heck of a lot about Minnesota Republicans or Minnesota issues. And the problems clearly are there. We've all talked about it in this podcast. But what is it that Republicans are offering as a fix for Minnesota's problems? And I'll start with you, Stan, and then Brian.
Well, unfortunately, I think this is where we as Republicans maybe miss an opportunity, because we complain about high taxes, poor education, high crime, and boy, we're going to come and we're going to do something about it. But we never really talk about the specifics. What could we do? What could we do to change public education that would help these kids who desperately need that help? And I would say, I don't hear this from my legislators, but I would say there are some radical things we could do. Number one, we could start by repealing mandates that are not academically related. I mean, it would free up many burdens from the school systems so that they could focus on academics. We could put in a meaningful provision that would pay teachers based on merit or performance, which might require some adjustment to union contracts, but that would be a healthy, create a pool of money. School boards, you can have it. Just get a merit-based program in place for part of the compensation for our teachers. I think that would be helpful. We should repeal ethnic studies. We should unwoke the Pellsby standards. We should introduce a Finance 101 class and, a program that talks about the path to stability in life. Before you have a baby, you get an education, you get a job, you get a car, you get a roof over your head, and you have a committed partner in life. And those are maybe, if you do it in that order, maybe you're going to have more stability. We need to show kids how they can achieve stability and overcome challenges in life. So that's one thing just in the K-12 education program that I would throw out. Childcare, we need to reduce regulations. We need to get rid of the STAR program, whatever it is, because we need home-based childcare people back in the business to make things more competitive. Housing, its interest rates. We don't have much to do with interest rates, but regulation, zoning, and yes, I'm going to say something that's controversial, deportations. When you bring in 10 million people into the country and you're 7 million short on houses, I got this from Governor Tim Pawlenty was saying this. Do you think that could have some impact on affordability of housing? I think it does. Crime, we can say more cops, we can say consequences, and I would say both of those are messages that our party should put forth. But we also have to tell people that reducing crime is a journey, and it starts in the family, and it starts in the classroom. You have to have kids who have hope, have intellect, abilities to overcome challenges so they don't go towards crime.
Let me jump in here and give Brian a chance to say, Brian, at the state capitol or in your other roles, do you hear Republican ideas for fixing the problems that Minnesota pins on, that Republicans pin on Governor Walz in Minnesota?
I think it's super important that Republicans be for something, not just against. And I think that's a fumble that the Democrats have done too. They don't do well when all they do is be the party of against Trump. You would think that would work. That does not work. And they fall into that trap. And we have to find out, what are we for? And Stan highlighted many things. One of the things I am most proud of working on at the state capitol is we were able to pass a personal finance graduation standard. Didn't get it exactly the way I wanted it, but that is something that we are definitely still working on and making a high priority. But Republicans need to figure out, how do we not fall into the same traps that the Democrats do, of focusing on fringe issues and then beating them to death. When we're the party that talks about the economy, we do well. When we talk about public safety, we do well. When we talk about bringing sanity back to education, we do well. when we're focusing on who's using what bathrooms and who's playing what sports, even though I 100% think it's ridiculous what's going on, that just doesn't play very well electorally. Doesn't mean it's not morally or intellectually correct, but electorally it gets tough. And we started off talking a little bit about the state party too. The state party is just not in a great position and hasn't been. I mean, I don't want to be the old man yelling at a cloud here, but when I think about when Ron Ebensteiner was running the party or Bill Cooper were running the party, they raised money and they got out of the way. And I just think that we have been so focused on what's the ideology of our party chairs, and that should not matter at all. But it seems to be mattering more than anything. And the delegates, and I'm going to make people angry, but the delegates have just gotten further and further right, and they are not focused on electoral issues. And that doesn't mean that they're morally or intellectually wrong, but sometimes politics is about winning elections. And when you win an election, then you can go forward with whatever your policy priorities are. But we have not been winning elections, and then we just keep getting angrier and angrier and angrier. The other thing I would say is that, getting older, whiter, and angrier is not a great strategy. It just isn't. And even though I'm old, I'm white, and I'm angry, I can recognize in myself that I am not someone who reflects the whole electorate. And I think that we have had, prosperity on the federal level, which I think has masked being able to just tread water at best, on the state level. But when the Democrats had the trifecta just a year and a half ago, whatever that was, look at all the damage they did to the state. And for all of the Republicans who stayed home, or they voted for Action for Liberty candidates, or they refused to elect somebody that they felt was a rhino, well, you know what? How about that $18 billion? Do you think that rhino maybe could have addressed that better than a progressive Democrat? The answer is yes. And we have to get into that mindset and not just worry about whether the Vikings are going to win. We need to make sure that Republicans win. Now, one thing I'm going to take a little bit of issue is Stan was disparaging Cedric Frazier. Cedric Frazier, like myself, is a Chicago guy, so he's a Bears fan, and for that, I do appreciate that in him. Bear down.
Oh, okay. All right, Brian. Well, that's good to know.
Good to know.
How do Republicans find candidates, Stan, who can win? Who can get through the minefields of being conservative enough to get past the delegates. And I learned from personal experience that every delegate has a particular issue that they feel very strongly about, and you, meaning me, don't feel as strongly about it as they do. And so they don't want you because you don't feel as strongly about their pet issue as they do. Stan, to get through that minefield and still then win a general election, what can Republicans do?
Well,
and I'm talking about governor, senator, and
statewide
Congress.
Races. Statewide races or congressional district race. Yeah, because it's a lot different at the local races. So that endorsement process isn't very difficult there. Well, I think it's the challenge that the Republican Party faces right now. Our delegate base is weighted as per our Constitution to the outstate redder districts. And so they have more voting power when it comes to endorsing a candidate, and they're generally, bless their hearts, I love every one of them. I want every one of their votes, but they're probably a little bit more conservative than people who can win in the metro. I'm not saying anything that we don't all agree with. So how do we thread that needle? I'm not certain, but it needs to be a full court press to try and convince our delegate base that it's important. Our endorsement process has unfortunately, an impeccable record. For the last 20 years, we've picked losers. It's hard to figure out how to do that, but we figured it out. we have to think differently about approaching it this time. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, I think a number of the gubernatorial candidates and maybe even some of our Senate candidates have already announced they're going to the primary. They are not going to stop if they do not get the endorsement of the Republican Party, which I think is, it's unfortunate. As a Republican Party official, we want to bring value to our candidates, money, ideas, energy, votes. But some of the candidates are saying, I'm going to go beyond. So I don't have really a perfect answer there other than there are people, we are working hard to try and improve that process and to get the candidate endorsed that can win. And I don't want the perfect candidate in the eyes of some Republicans to be the enemy of a good candidate who could serve our state and all of Minnesota quite well, although not perfect.
Brian, with Melissa Hortman assassinated and now conservative, outspoken Charlie Kirk killed, that can't help our nation find good candidates, can it? Do you sense a fear amongst politicians about running and potential politicians about running?
100%, 100%. And I think that fear already existed with the left. And at the time, I kind of like felt that they were, being a little, they were overstating the threat. And I think that I've been proven wrong. I've worked at the Capitol 26. This will be my 26th year. I was there for 9/11. All they did is make us wear our badge on the outside of our clothes. But we can't in good conscience say that there now is not a threat. And, you could have argued incorrectly that the Melissa Hortman and John Hoffman shootings was a one-off. But now it's escalated with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I know that one of the reasons that a lot of people don't want to go back for a special session is because they're a little bit afraid, especially when you're talking about gun issues, that it's going to attract people that are looking to either react to Annunciation or react to Charlie Kirk or react to Melissa Hortman and John Hoffman or whatever it might be. And I spoke just last week with a Republican, a very conservative Republican, who is considering throwing their hat in the ring for governor, who absolutely brought up that they are putting themselves in personal danger. And we just can't tell them that they're wrong at this point. We have the worst case scenario has happened. And now it has happened multiple times and in Minnesota. So I think you're going to see a massive amount of retirements, and it's going to be harder to recruit people that aren't fire breathers on the left or the right, which will only exacerbate a lot of the problems that we currently have.
Well, on that hopeful note, I think we better wrap up episode 9 of the Extremely Non-Extreme podcast by Principle Based Politics. It's been a great pleasure having both of you, Stanley Hamilton and Brian McDaniel, on the podcast. You both did very well and really improved the level of understanding that the listeners will have regarding where the Republican Party is at this point in Minnesota. And I envision having you both back if you'd be willing to come back and talk more about more specific topics. I know there are a lot of things left unsaid, but we'll close for now. And thank you both for your time. And listeners, be on the lookout for episode 10 soon to follow.
Thank you.
Thank you.